Hello and welcome everyone to another interview on the Intentional Parenting and Life Summit. I'm Diana Yoakley, your co-host and founder of Delight in Parenting. And today I have here with me Lynn Tatera. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Diana.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today. And before we get into our discussion, I wanted to just briefly introduce Jamie. So, Jamie is the creator and author of the Mindfulness and Self-Compassion for Children and Caregivers program. The Mindfulness and Self-Compassion workbook for kids that she's also written is available now for pre-order. We're going to have the link below here for you guys to check that out and maybe get a free copy of a chapter of the book workbook. So she's also a certified mindful self-compassion teacher, an MSc for teens teacher, and an MSc CC teacher and teacher trainer. Additionally, she's a certified mindful yoga instructor with specialized training in the therapeutic benefits of yoga for children. Jamie Lynn has taught in the School of Education at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and has years of experience as an elementary school educator. Jamie Lynn trains educators, families, and clinicians in her resiliency programs and has a wealth of experience teaching mindfulness and self-compassion to adults, children, teens, and families. So I'm really delighted to have you here today. I know this is going to be a wonderful conversation and will greatly benefit our audience.
Thank you.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how can self-compassion help kids with self-esteem and resiliency overall. And so I'm really delighted to dive into this. But for parents that might be brand new to self-compassion, and they've probably heard that obviously the term compassion, being compassionate in general, but there's a whole science on this term self-compassion now. Would you introduce us briefly of these key elements and maybe give us a brief history before we get into how do we apply this with our children and build some skills to help them become more resilient?
Absolutely. So, a quick, simple definition of self-compassion is learning to treat ourselves like we treat a good friend. And the way that oftentimes adults come to realize that they may or may not be self-compassionate is by considering. So you can do this along with me. Those of you who are watching this what do you call this? Interview. Yes.
Summit, yeah, interview, yep.
Yes, interview. That if you think about if you had a colleague, a friend, who came to you and said, I'm struggling, let's just, since this is in the context of parenting, maybe they have a
Mhm.
parenting struggle, they feel overwhelmed, they fell short and they tried to make it better. Just thinking in your own mind how you might respond to your friend, right? So words, body language, gestures, tone of voice, and then considering how you typically respond to yourself when you are feeling overwhelmed with parenting challenges, or you maybe fell short in your ideal way of showing up for your kids. Again, words, body language, tone of voice, and are there differences? So for a lot of people, there's a little gap there. And
Yeah.
self-compassion is about learning to fill in that gap where we treat ourselves with the same kindness, love, and support that we would offer to a friend during moments of struggle.
I love that. Because yeah, like you said, there sometimes might be a big gap between the two. And it's almost like culturally we're so like accepting of course we should be kind to others and treat them like guests and help them with things when they're struggling. But when it comes to ourselves, it's like you've got to try harder, you've got to work more, like it's not enough. And I know that's true for adults, but children also have these mindsets, right? And pretty early on, often, right? I don't know at what age they become so kind of like self-critical, but it's got to start pretty early, right?
Well, and it's, I think some kids are born more innately self-critical. Like I know my younger daughter was born just like, I don't know, she had a strong, I mean, she also externally, like she could set boundaries, man.
Yeah.
She could say no, but she also internally could whoop, just take herself down from very little on. And then and some kids are less, but I'd say definitely by like kind of a critical age is around 8 years old when you develop this awareness of how others perceive you.
Hmm.
It's oftentimes the fear of will others think I'm good enough is what drives the inner critic. So around
Yeah.
the time where kids really, that's where sometimes we see self-criticism and self-criticism increase and self-esteem take a drop is
Mm.
around third grade when they're like, am I good enough? And
Yeah,
of course,
because
totally
around that
expected.
age,
Mhm.
yeah, I was gonna say around that age, peer relationships become kind of the next developmental leap. Up until age 7, it's all about the attachment to the primary caregiver, and that's what the child's kind of naturally oriented towards. But then, like you said, they turn 8, they're in elementary school, but even when they start elementary school, they're not so peer oriented. But later, they naturally, it's like developmentally appropriate for them to care about their peers. But that can sometimes be a painful transition, right? Because it can feel harsh, like how we kind of beat ourselves up in order to fit in, to belong.
Yes, yes. And again, of course, this gets exacerbated preteen, teen, right? Like it just keeps. So early intervention is always good when it comes to helping kids develop a compassionate, kind, supportive inner voice.
Yeah. And so, I hear a lot of parents like talking about growth mindset, and I think that's kind of become a bit more, at least in my circles, parenting circles online, the growth mindset has become definitely more part of the conversation. But it's not a perfect system. And I think a lot of parents still have questions around like, well, how do I help my kids develop a more self-confidence, self-esteem? A sense of like being good enough. I'd love for you to kind of talk about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion. Is that one and the same? And yeah.
So it's interesting because self-esteem, I like to say that self-esteem is like a fickle friend, right? So when we are doing well, when we perceive that others perceive us well, our self-esteem is high. When
Mm-hmm.
we kind of feel like we're negatively comparing to others, we're falling short, our self-esteem is low. And of course, when do we need self-esteem? When we don't have it, and that's when it's inaccessible. And so
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion is a much more stable way to gain a sense of well-being. Because self-compassion says, I am valuable because I am a human being, right? And I have strengths and I have struggles just like other human beings. So when I am doing well, I can enjoy that fact. I can celebrate my strengths, recognizing that this does not make me above others.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It makes me having talents as others do. Again, I might have more skills in this area, but I am not a better person. And then similarly, when I am comparatively low in skills, to be able to say everybody has strengths and weaknesses, including me. And this is an area of relative struggle. And so we can
Mm-hmm.
both give ourselves tenderness because it feels yucky. We all know it feels yucky when you negatively compare to others. Nobody likes it. So validating
Yeah.
that, giving ourselves tenderness, and then keeping it in perspective. Everybody struggles in some areas. And then again, having that growth mindset so I can grow and change. And truthfully, even though you can grow and change, you're still going to have areas of struggle. Nobody, can be like top on everything. It's not humanly possible.
So self-esteem is I guess it's like what we feel high self-esteem if there is an outcome that's evaluated highly in society or whatever, right? Like compared to something, there's a success and now it's like we can celebrate, and the outcome is like we have higher self-esteem as a result. Whereas with self-compassion, it doesn't really matter like whether you have high results, poor results, it's going to meet you wherever you're at and kind of label you as part of like this is just life, this is just like whether it's a rainy day or a sunny day, all of it's welcome because it's all part of this common humanity, this common thing we all have as humans we share, right?
Absolutely, 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 yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we think about building and yeah, so how do we help kids develop these skills? I know it's hard enough for adults, and we could talk about it in generalities and then kind of dive into how do we support kids, because I know parents that are struggling with this as well need to support themselves in building these skills. But yeah, I would love to kind of kick it off with how do we build skills in general, and then specifically support children and being intentional about helping them develop these skills.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the most important thing for parents, I guess a couple of things. One is relationship. Our relationship with the child will help them to learn the skills. So just that's the Really crucial thing. And what's beautiful, kind of as you highlighted earlier, is that self-compassion never outdistances us, right? It always meets us exactly where you are. So if you're a caregiver watching, watching this right now with us here, and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so hard on myself, right? And my self-esteem is like, you know what I mean? Like, watching
Hmm.
tennis ball go all over the court, then that's the first thing you can acknowledge. We want to build in, um, Diana, I think I sometimes use animals when I talk about stuff.
Yeah.
My
I love
animal
them.
is a little dog, called Buddy, and Buddy helps us remember we're not alone. And so even if you're a caregiver and you have a habit of beating yourself up, you're not alone, right? So like recognizing, okay, I'm not alone. I can be aware of this. And that's the first step. So like not beating ourselves up for beating ourselves up. And then
Yeah.
the second step would be to start to grow a second voice, right? So even with your child, like let's say, so part of being intentional is thinking, what am I modeling? And am I modeling being fully human? So sometimes when we think about what am I modeling, we think about like top tier. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
If you only model top tier, your child who's here is going to think I can never live up. I can never
Hmm.
live up to mommy. I can never live up to daddy, grandma, grandpa, whoever it is, right? So if you model, I'm really struggling in this area, maybe you even model, I'm kind of having this thought like I'm not good enough. And I know that that's a lie. I am a good person. Everyone has strengths, everyone has struggles, and I'm going to give myself a little love here and I'm going to keep going. So again, modeling, interestingly enough, modeling both, like being
Yeah.
able
Both.
to be, because mindfulness is a piece of self-compassion. And so
Hmm.
kids are oftentimes, and adults too, are actually unconscious of the fact that they're even critical of themselves. Right?
Hmm.
All that they know is they feel deflated and they don't want to do that, right? Like, I don't want to try that new thing, right? And they don't even know I don't want to try it because I'm afraid that I'm going to fail. And I'm afraid that if I fail, I'm not going to be a good enough person. They don't have those things. They just know, don't want to do it. But the more
Yeah.
that we are mindful of and we name these kind of metacognitive skills, and then also can name meeting them with resources, kids can develop the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I love that you're highlighting the balance because it can feel such like an uphill climb constantly, the striving for like that, that resiliency you're trying to teach your kids, right? Like these amazing skills, right? Like, but what you're saying is that even when we're not able to show up in that ideal way, or I don't even know if it's ideal, it's more about like in your best parenting moments, even in your worst parenting moments, or even if your child is having a hard time, there's still a lesson there, and it's a very valuable lesson. And the lesson is that you it's okay to be where you are and you're not alone, and it kind of makes it okay to be messy, right? Like makes it okay and normalizes it. It's like the goal isn't to not be messy, the goal is just to be okay, right? Or yeah, you probably would say it better than me. But yeah, what is kind of the goal? Like when, obviously when things are great, it's great. But when things aren't so great in our kids' lives, like with social relationships and academics and, neurodiversity and reactivity and emotional dysregulation in the home, and things don't feel okay, self-compassion still can show up there and it can make us feel more supported.
Absolutely. And what it does, which is super important, it mitigates shame, it lessens shame. So oftentimes when we're struggling, when we're a mess, it's followed by, I shouldn't be a mess. What's wrong with me? Which only is going to compound negative behavior patterns, negative thoughts. If we can say, whoa, I'm a mess. Everyone is messy sometimes, like even like,
Yeah.
giving ourselves a little physical support, you know, acts of kindness, maybe a kind action, like I'm a mess, I'm going to go for a walk because this is what I really
Yeah.
need, then there's not that negative spiral and we can actually rebound faster than if we're like,
Right.
no, 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 don't be messy. Because if we're like, don't be messy, now we become anxious. So either we fall into shame because I'm so messy, or we try to control it and now we're anxious. And so now we've just got more difficult feelings to be with rather than just surrendering to that this is a messy moment. Everybody has them. What do I need right now?
Yeah. So the goal isn't to avoid those pitfalls. It's more about being more flexible and like adjustable. It's really that resiliency piece, which is like a rubber band, right? Like it stretches, but it can come back. So like inevitably things will happen. And it kind of reminds me of like spilled milk. So like inevitably you'll spill some milk sometimes or you'll spill some water, right? That's life. Like you can't control every time like perfectly pouring something, and kids can't always when they're growing up and stuff, right? Inevitably. So what happens when you spill the milk? You can make a repair. You can get the paper towel or the towel, whatever, and wipe it off. And so the same is true with um kind of using self-compassion, right? Instead of saying like, I'm such an idiot for spilling the milk, like, my gosh, or telling your kid like, I can't believe you spilled the milk, right? Like it adds like insult to the injury, right? Versus just getting the paper towel and saying like, oops, we spilled milk. What can we do now to fix it? Let's get the paper towel.
Right. And sometimes it's more, it's bigger than that. Like maybe it's a spilled milkshake. Because spilled milk, you can always just pour yourself another cup. But sometimes it's like, but it's my milkshake. And now
Yeah.
I don't have a milkshake. And so again, just allowing the wave of feelings. Right? You
Yeah.
really wanted the milkshake. Like this is really upset. You're upset with yourself. You're upset with it. And just like letting the wave follow through. And huh, looks like the milkshake's on the ground. So what are we gonna, so again, like allowing, so it's not about like clipping the feelings. We let them be there.
Right.
And then we move forward as human beings, acknowledging that these kinds of things do happen. And if we drop the milkshake because we were carrying too many things at one time, we can also be aware. Again, we don't need to beat ourselves up, but we can be aware, like, maybe I need to take 2 trips next time, so I'm less. So again, it's not like sometimes people think like if I'm self-compassionate, then I'm not going to learn and grow. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
that's like a misnomer because if I'm self-compassionate, I want myself to have well-being over time, which means I'm definitely going to learn and grow because I want to have well-being over time.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. Yeah. Um, just because you're soothing yourself in the moment doesn't mean that you are now going to lower your own expectations of how you want to show up in the world, right? And it's like, well, every mistake, then I can just continue to do them on purpose, right? The intention is to support yourself. So, but it's not perfection. It's just
Yes.
kind of the scaffolding.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love for you to dive into a little bit, with self-compassion, there's the three elements of mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. And I know the self-compassion break is a great resource for parents. I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about how they can kind of use that, but how do we teach kids the self-compassion break, or how is that translated into a way that children will actually use? Because so often we're talking at kids and maybe we're lecturing them or teaching, and sometimes they're just like zoning out because it's not landing. So what are some ways to teach kids these practical ways of using self-compassion in daily life, something like a self-compassion break?
Right. Well, and it's interesting too because again, the three components of self-compassion are one being mindful. And again, if I was going to use an animal, I'd use my little giraffe here called spots, where we spot, our emotions, we can spot our five senses, we're aware, right? So noticing
Hmm.
when we're struggling. Buddy would be the second kind of component of self-compassion. I'm not alone. This is human. Humans experience these kinds of things sometimes. And then the
Hmm.
third element is kindness, which is my Snuggles the bunny, which can be gentle and it can also be supportive. And so kids have a hardest time with the snuggles. Oftentimes, and I think it's not even a developmentally appropriate expectation to expect kids to really gently self-soothe themselves. It's something I think they're wired to get from others. And
Yeah.
get it from others long enough, eventually and usually when kids start with an inner voice that's kind, it's a strong one, right? Like I can do this. I've got, you know what I mean? So just being mindful of that their kids are not little adults, right? So that we can't
Yeah.
necessarily expect them, but we're modeling, and you'll be surprised when someday you'll hear that your kid did it, right? But again, you want to be modeling it, being the voice you want your kids to internalize.
Yeah.
The one that I see kids picking up on more quickly is actually kind of the spots and the buddy habits, which is noticing and then reminding themselves they're not alone. And something else, one more thing here. I don't want to get into too many details because I know we have finite time, but I have a little quiz on my website called the Feelings Habit Animal Quiz. So
Hmm.
helping kids to learn what is their habits with feelings? Do they explode? Do they hide them? Do they obsess about them? Are they ashamed of having them? And animals really are effective ways. That's why my workbook is full of animals. They're effective ways for, because kids don't care about feelings. They don't care. I mean, they don't want to know how to deal with feelings. They just want to play. And so if you want
So
them to learn
funny.
about these things, you have to make it feel like it's play. And so
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of finding out what their animal is, becoming more aware of it, and then de-shaming it, right? So if they're a feelings hider, like being able to say like, oh, I'm hiding my feelings again, not the only kid, or oh, I exploded again, I'm not alone. And ironically, that base of mindful awareness and I'm not alone makes them able over time to grow and change because they can hold it in their awareness without falling into shame. And growth and
Mm,
change really does come from being able to hold something in awareness with kindness. And from that space of kindness, we can grow and change.
yeah. I love that. Using the animals and but maybe it made me think of like stuffed animals. I mean, kids love plushies and stuffed animals, and they use them in play often. And it's almost like they're playing out their emotional lives in another character's life, right? So it's not such a personal thing because, like you said, that shame, if it's like, let's talk about your feelings, the shame can be so quick to like show its, well, it hides, right? But it'll pop up and it will make you want to hide, and makes them want to shut down. So if we can keep it like arm's length away, these conversations, and like you said, using play, I think that's a very effective way. But even if kids like action figures or something, is there a way to like incorporate some self-compassion dialogue around of feelings and mindfulness? I would imagine that you could be like, oh, GI Joe or whatever character, yeah, Spider-Man. I wonder what Spider-Man's feeling right now. Like, oh, he seems really, he's just nervous. Maybe he's nervous about fighting this bad guy. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And then maybe you add in and everybody gets nervous sometimes. And again, these little pieces, and then also empathy for others. There's really a figure eight between, like I wonder what's going on with that kid who's crying on the playground. I bet you they're having a really hard time. They're having a hard time sharing. Sometimes sharing is really hard. So just again, the more you can build these connections many different ways, the more avenues kids are going to have to make those linkages in their own mind so that they can eventually again self-soothe and deal
mhm.
effectively with difficult emotions.
Yeah, yeah. Something else that came to mind that I've also heard about supporting kids and learning self-compassion is to talk about like um, maybe like the inner critical voice being more like a bully, because kids aren't familiar with the term bully. I mean, I don't. It's probably not like a fun topic to talk about, but it happens in reality. It happens in school. It happens on the playground. They're familiar with the concept of like he was being mean to me, right? Or like she was being a bully. So would you suggest something like, is there a voice in your head that kind of feels a little bit like a bully versus like your best friend? Like your best friend will come up to you in the playground and say, hey, you know what? Like, I like your shirt versus a bully coming up and saying, that's an ugly shirt. Is that a way to correlate the way that their social relationships happen with other kids in terms of the self-compassionate parts going on in their mind about themselves and maybe even about other people?
Well, and it can definitely be helpful to name it like that. Absolutely. And I think it's really important for kids and grown-ups to know that that bully voice is actually on your side with a
Right.
messed up strategy. And so I
Yeah.
do find a lot of kids get like, because when they're fighting that voice, it just in some ways it can almost increase their tension
Yeah.
rather than like, okay, that voice is there. It thinks it's helping me, it's not helping me. Okay, I'm going to use a
Yeah. Yeah.
different voice that's more helpful because that voice and because it's trying to motivate us. It's trying to prevent us from
Mhm.
making mistakes. Like again, good intention, poor strategy. And so I think the more we
Right.
can help kids to recognize that that voice is trying to help us, but it's not. And so we can acknowledge it. You could even thanks for trying to help me. And again, some kids not, but some kids might actually, and
Yeah.
like here's another voice. Like I like to use the analogy of a coach because kids get this. If you had a coach
Mhm.
that every time you messed up was like, you know what, you're a failure. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like you would not be able to keep trying hard at your sport. But if you had a coach that's
Yeah.
like, all right, we missed it. Everybody misses a shot. Let's try again. Kids oftentimes
Mhm.
get, I feel like the sports metaphors or the
Mhm.
teacher for an instrument or whatever, like works with your
Mhm.
kid is a more accessible way for them to understand the voice that they're trying to cultivate and the voice that's not helpful, even though it might be well intended.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So you would say, yeah, I love that because it makes it more practical, like more concrete. Sometimes these conversations can become very like abstract, right? For it's we can handle it because we're adults, but like their brains just are at a young age and just think more concretely, right? So we have to make it more like reality based. Like, what is this similar to in your life? Maybe a teacher and a child, right? Um, versus having kind of an abstract conversation around let's be kinder to ourselves, like that voice in your head. It's like, what voice, you know?
Yeah, and some
Um,
kids have more metacognitive awareness and some kids have less. Some kids just get body sensation. So I think that's really important to be aware of too. And then there's one
mhm,
more thing I'd like to touch on as it relates to self-compassion. And it circles back to this idea of strengths and weaknesses. Because a huge part of self-compassion is knowing what you value and
mhm,
being intentional about living in accord with your values. And this can be hard for kids who so want approval. So my 16-year-old and I have had a lot of conversations like about this recently because she has dyslexia and her brain is just wired for like creative exploration. And her brain is not wired to memorize anything that doesn't have meaning. And so in school,
mhm.
she does well, but like with immense effort and like,
Yeah.
lots of skillful support and scaffolding. But just recently, she's wanted to be parts of all different kinds of clubs, because again, kids just want to be involved in everything. And so just yesterday, I said, older daughter, her name, right? If when you're a senior, when you graduate, right? When you graduate as a senior and you look back, how are you going to feel about having been a part of this club? And she's like, eh. I said, how are you going to feel about having become an Eagle Scout? She's like, yes. I'm like, how are you going to feel about having been part of pit band? Yes. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? And I tell my kids, you can do anything you set your mind to, but you can't do everything. And so, really, again, and this is where adults, we can try to do this for ourselves. It's hard work to be intentional, but sometimes
Yeah.
fast forwarding and thinking, when my kids are grown, is it going to matter if I did this thing? What's going to matter? This is
Mhm.
part of being self compassionate, is really paying attention to what we need, what we value, and then making life choices that support it.
Oh yeah, I love that you brought that forward. Yeah. Because I mean, and yeah, it's like it's going to be a struggle otherwise, right? Like you're just setting yourself up for failure. Um, and you kind of miss like spending the bulk of your time and energy on the things that are most important. Um, but self-compassion is a resource that we can use to once we become intentional and identify our family values and what we value in our life, so that we to 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 get there we can use self-compassion as a resource
We can use self compassion as a
and
resource.
let go of the things that and use self-compassion to let go of the things that we're letting go.
Yeah, exactly. We need it because it's hard. Like she was doing,
Yeah.
my older daughter was doing Model UN, which is such a great thing to do. But it's just, again, she also needs to study for more. Anyways, there's some things that are good things to do. And when we let go, there's grieving. And so we can grieve, we can acknowledge that, and then we can acknowledge again that common humanity. Everybody's got choices to make. And
Mhm.
everybody's invitation is to live the life like, and this is what I tell my kids all the time. You have a gift. You have a unique gift that you are meant to develop and share with the world. And it's so important that we support our kids in identifying their unique gifts, identifying ways that they can help to grow them and share them. Because again, it's part of what gives life meaning.
Yeah, that strength-based like approach. What are their strengths and can they do more of that? Because that's actually what's gonna what they're gonna feel more reward for, I guess. They're gonna get more more bang for their buck there. Yeah, and as we wrap up, just kind of thinking on the beginning of our conversation around self-esteem, is it like something, is self-esteem something that parents should continue to spend so much time and energy on building, or should we reframe that self-esteem and say, let's focus instead on self-compassion because it's going to get us further. It's going to be there more consistently than self-esteem is, or is there a place for both? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think again, there can be good sources of self-esteem. Like I feel good about myself because I live in accord with my values, right? That would be a positive, stable way of like developing self-esteem. But kind of again, if I use that context of that I just shared about my older daughter, what self-esteem is or self-worth is going to look like is that I am living the life that I want to live. I am living in accord with the values that I have. And other people can judge me. I can fall short in these different areas. I'm doing my best. I am a good person. Like this is stable. And so,
Mhm,
I mean, whether you put the label self-esteem on it, maybe the label self-worth might be a better label than that. But
mhm.
yeah, I think the way like trying to help our kid feel like you're a good person because you're so successful.
Right,
Ooh, is that a setup for failure in life? Even if they're successful their whole life, they're always going to be striving for, am I good enough?
right.
Good enough, rather than I am living the life that matters to me and I am a good person. That's really where we want our kids to get. But again, I just want to acknowledge that we do not live in a culture that supports this value. And
Right.
it's a countercultural thing for us to do it for ourselves as parents and support our
Mhm.
kids in doing it for themselves too.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so we're focusing on with self-compassion meets us, like we said, it meets us wherever we are. And so with self-compassion helps us acknowledge at any point, I'm a good person no matter what, where which yeah, which really is the foundation of resiliency, right? So it doesn't really, so it's really like it doesn't matter what happens. We have a resource. That's, I guess that's kind of what's sticking up in my head, out in my head, like that we have a way to self-soothe, or we're role modeling this for our kids and giving them that self-soothing. But eventually, as they become adults, we're giving them a resource to handle whether it's a sunny day or a rainy day. They can apply it along that spectrum, and it's going to come through for them,
Yes.
no matter what the environment is.
Exactly. And if you're a parent who's watching this, by the way, awesome. You're doing a great job parenting. Really, you're watching a parenting summit. Like, so you're like, you get thumbs up. But if you're like, I'm not quite living the life that I want to be living, again, you bring
Mhm.
self-compassion to that. I'm doing the best I can. I'm not the only one who struggles here. Like, again, you bring in those resources of mindful awareness, common humanity, and then kindness can look like, again, self soothing, but also supporting yourself to make little teeny shifts so that you
Mhm.
feel like more and more over time, your life matches your values.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. To highlight that last step of like the kindness is like, what can I do now to support myself? So if you want to realign with what your life looks like to what your values are, that self-compassion helps you. It's like, what can I do now that's going to get me back into alignment? And it's like an action you take, right? You move into action to do something to help yourself. So like you said, it's not just like self-indulging, but it's actually like it moves you. It creates like taking action to get to where you want to go. If you're not happy where you are, acknowledging that's where you are and soothing yourself if you're unhappy, and then what is the next step so I can go to where I want to go. It mobilizes you, which I love that part as well.
Absolutely. And what is great about it is that it mobilizes you from a place of love and empowerment. So oftentimes, if we're not having a great self-compassion practice, what's motivating us is I don't want to fall short. I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like this fear of negative appraisal, whereas self-compassion is not fear motivated. It is
Mhm.
love motivated. I want to take this action. I want to make a shift because I am a human being worthy of living a life that matches with what I value, right? So it's like it's
Mhm.
absolutely mobilizing, but mobilizing from a place of empowerment rather than fear.
Mhm. Yeah, and what greater gift to give your child than that, right?
And
If you're
that's
gonna want to, if yeah,
yes, yes. Oftentimes, like a fully actualized parent is the greatest gift you can give to your child, right? Again, balancing
right.
will, attuning to them and attuning to yourself always, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the number one way to teach our kids self-compassion is to become more self-compassionate ourselves. But as we talked about, using play and um, being more concrete around how we explain it to them and kind of translate it into child language is also helpful. So kind of balancing both of those strategies, I think, is key. Yeah, and I think your workbook is also going to be a great resource for parents. So check it out. The link is below. You can pre-order it. It's going to be available for ordering. Actually, it's going to come out in October, end of October, right? The 24th
October
or so.
24th. Yes.
24th, yeah. So you can get it into your mailbox as soon as possible. And what I love about workbooks compared to regular books, I love regular books too, but the workbooks is where the action happens. Like that is where the practice is. And if I've learned anything about theories is that it just stays a theory on the shelf collecting dust if you don't put it into practice. And so I love workbooks and I highly recommend parents check that out and use it with their kids. Um, yeah, and it'll give you guidance so you don't have to be all creative and think about all these games to play self-compassion with kids. Just use the workbook and it'll give you the guidance. So that's super exciting.
Yeah, and I sometimes it's almost
Yeah.
like a playbook too, because again, it's comics, it's playful. So your kids aren't
Yes.
quite back at you like they would with some other things. Although anything you do with your kids that's not 100% play, sometimes it's good to have a little celebration at the end because, kids
Yeah.
oftentimes prefer video games and Legos over even the funnest of social emotional learning skills, right?
Yes, that's true. That's true. Awesome. Amazing conversation. Yeah, so we'll have the freebie linked below and I really appreciate having you on today. I know this is a wonderful resource for parents and yeah, looking forward to the feedback from the audience. Thank
Wonderful.
you so much, Jamie.